Hello, today we will be talking about the chapter The Living Organisms, Their Characteristics and Habitats. This is chapter 9 from book Science Class 6. This video is presented by Taneesha Sethi. Living organisms. Living organisms or living things are those which have or shows movement, are made up of cells, have a defined lifespan, reproduces, responds to stimuli, needs food for survival, and respire. That means they breathe. These living organisms live in an environment. The environment, when defined, is said to be all that surrounds and affects these organisms. The living organisms are all around us, and they differ with different surroundings. The environment can be of two types. It can be natural or it can be man-made. The natural environment are those such as forests, lakes, mountains, deserts, etc. And the man-made is cities, towns, villages, etc. Though there are two different types of environments, the environment in itself is composed of various components. These components are categorically divided into two types, biotic and abiotic. Biotic composes of all the living organisms, whereas the abiotic composes of all the non-living components of the environment. Biotic components are of three types: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers are the primary sources which can compose their own food, whereas consumers are those that depend on the producers for food, and decomposers are those that depend on the dead or decaying bodies of those producers and consumers. Whereas the abiotic components are air, water, soil, sunlight, temperature, humidity, etc. All these abiotic factors affect the environment and its composition. These natural requirements are what leads to the survival of the organism. A habitat thus consists of both the biotic as well as the abiotic factors of the environment. Habitats are categorically divided into two types, that is, the aquatic and the terrestrial. These aquatic and terrestrial in itself have many other types of habitats. Let us talk about the aquatic habitat. Aquatic comes from the word aqua, which means water. The aquatic habitat thus is the water habitats, and the organisms which are found in the aquatic habitat are called as aquatic organisms. These aquatic habitats can be further divided into three types. First, marine habitat, the second, freshwater habitat, and the third, coastal habitat. Marine habitat is characterized by the features such as salt water, which is found usually in oceans and seas. The organisms found there are namely sharks, whales, sea turtles, seaweeds, etc. The freshwater habitats are those characterized by the founding of fresh water, such as lakes, rivers, ponds, streams. Organisms found in freshwater habitats are various types of fishes and plants such as water lilies. The coastal habitats are regions where the sea meets the lands, such as estuaries. The organisms found here are crabs, oysters, seaweeds, and mangrove forests. The second classification of the habitat, the terrestrial habitats, comes from the word terra, which means earth or land. The organisms and the features of the environment found here are above land, whereas in aquatic it was below land or into the water. The terrestrial habitats has plants and animals that thrive on land and thus are called as terrestrial organisms. There are many types of terrestrial habitats seen, namely desert habitat, grassland habitat, rainforest habitat, polar habitat, and mountain habitat. The desert habitat is the one which has very little rainfall as one of its main features, with cold nights and very hot days. The soil found there is sandy in nature and have small oases in the midst. Example being the Sahara Desert. The organisms found there are camels, scorpions, lizards, and cactuses. The next one, the grassland habitats, have moderate rainfall as one of its characteristic features, with plenty of grass interspersed with small plants such as shrubs, herbs, etc. The organisms found here are zebras, giraffes, deers, lions, horses, and various types of grasses. The rainforest habitat is what we call as the hot and wet. This is due to the rainfall present there. The organisms found there are monkeys, snakes, tigers, and a variety of plants and trees. Then comes the polar habitats. The polar habitats are characterized by their very, very cold atmosphere and are usually found covered in snow. The example of organisms found there are polar bears, seals, penguins, reindeers, and some kinds of spursine grasses. The last but not the least is the mountain habitats. The mountain habitats are high-rise lands which are usually rocky, have cold and windy atmosphere, and at the very peaks have snowfalls. The organisms found there are goats, sheep, yaks, and the trees such as pines and deodars. Concluding, we can say that there are different living organisms, and living organisms have their characteristic features through which they can be described and defined. The environment is where these living organisms thrive and survive, forming habitats which are the natural areas where these living organisms can be found. These habitats can be of two types, that is, the terrestrial and the aquatic, and those in themselves can be of different types. With this, the chapter's topic, habitat, is finished. Thank you. Hello. Today we will be talking about the chapter